I spent my whole youth growing up to be a hockey player. And when I got to be 20 years old, I realized that I was never going to make any money doing that. But I didn't want to do a normal job. And so I thought, what's interesting? And Indiana Jones came out, so strange but true. I thought, that looks like a good job. You get to travel around and see exotic places. And I lived in northern Alberta in Canada, which was cold. And so, it was a split between geology and archaeology, and I started to take courses in both, and archaeology, fell in love with it right away, particularly because of travel and the past, and always had an interest in that, but I never realized it because I was so set in my ways in terms of playing sports. It took a long time to figure that out. So I remember the moment in some ways. I was in a bookstore when I was in this liminal state trying to understand why or what I want to do now that I can't do what I thought I was going to do. And I was in a bookstore, and I somehow gravitated over to the area where they had the books on archaeology, not with any intent in mind that that's what I wanted to do, or there's no purpose behind it. And I saw a book there by Howard Carter, which was his memoirs of Tutankhamun, and I was looking at that. And then right beside it was a smaller book by Michael Coe called The Maya. And I remembered something about them from when I was in school. And so I had this Howard Carter book, and I had this Michael Coe book on the Maya, but I didn't have any money to really buy them. And my roommate said, "Do you want those books?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd love to, but I don't have any money." And he said, "Well, I'll buy them for you." And I took them both home, and I started to read the Howard Carter Tutankhamun book, which was very interesting, but it didn't grab me right away. And then the Michael Coe book was right beside my bed, so I picked that up one day and I read it in a whole day. And so I remember telling my friends, one of the things that he said in the book was that British Honduras, because it was an older version, before Belize existed, he said, there's lots of important ruins in British Honduras, but no one's really working there. So I went on a trip with my friends the next weekend, a ski trip, and I said to them, I'm going back to school, I think I'm going to be an archaeologist, and I'm going to work in British Honduras. And they all told me, first of all, they said, where's British Honduras? So I had to draw it on a napkin for them. And then they said, yeah, sure. And I've been there for 20 years now. And one of my friends from that same trip said, you told us that one day in a chalet at the ski lodge and drew a map of Belize and said you were going to go work there, and you did. So it kind of happened that way, the bookstore and the book, and it worked out. There's lots of objects, and there's lots of buildings that are interesting. I think some of the things that we're working on now that I think are the most significant are actually sort of these broader ideas. So I'm working on a team where we're doing a lot of archaeological excavations, but we have people that are doing climatology, and we have people that are looking at agricultural systems. We have people that are doing cave archaeology. And so the most fascinating thing for me is all these different data sets, all these different sort of explorations that people are really focusing on, but bringing them all together and getting an understanding of how people in this one community that we're working on, this one ancient community, how they lived, how they interacted with their environment, how the community grew and expanded, but then also ran into tough times. And so it's not one single thing that I think is the most significant for me, is that broader picture, and also what that might hold or tell us about what's going on today, the lessons that we might sort of learn from the Maya from the past. For one, we have to learn that we live in an environment that is finite, and so you can't just use and abuse it without there being ramifications. And I think the Maya did that unknowingly, and I mean, I think we're still doing that today. And the second thing that's related to that is I think the Maya in the past, and even people today, still make the mistake of not looking far enough in their future. We tend to look, politicians in particular, look 4 years ahead to the next election. And that's why we get ourselves in these situations of crisis, environmental crisis, social crisis, or whatever. So we're making the same mistakes. I think the strength of archaeology is to point out that there are lessons in the past. Rome was a fabulous empire, but things went wrong there. The Maya had a fabulous civilization as well, and they're still Maya today, but they ran into troubles too. And I think it's arrogant for us to think that it can't happen to us as well. So that's learning from the past and actually acting on it are two different things. And that's the hardest thing is, people come and they're fascinated by the lessons that we learn, but whether they actually ever follow through on it is another story. I mentioned this in my lecture today. There's something called mycetitis. So I work at a very small site, but it's in the middle of the nowhere, and it's my favorite because it took us not over a full year, but a number of trips to find it because it had sort of got lost. So people knew where it was in 1927, and then we had to re-find it again. So it took great effort to find it. Many camping trips out into the jungle where we would run out of water, have to get water from the top of the tarps that we were sleeping under, and drink that, and it was all cloudy. And but we eventually found this site, and I've camped there overnight many, many times, and it just has this amazing feel to it. And every time I think, the site is called Minan Ha, and it's close to the Guatemalan border. But it's in the middle of nowhere. Very few people live around it. And every time I think I'm going to go work somewhere else, it manages to sort of give me something else that draws me back in again. And so I have this this sort of love relationship with this particular piece of ground in the middle of the jungle that the birds sing every time I walk up the trail, and the sun shines brighter in the mornings there, and it's just a wonderful place to work. There's a special feel about it. So it's very personal, selfish kind of thing, but my site is my favorite site. I remember being put on the spot by a grade 4 class once who came up to the university because their teacher was interested in archaeology. And so I had a lecture that I used for a first-year university class that was about what do archaeologists do and why do we do it. So I could use the same lecture, change the language a little bit, make it more understandable for the grade 4s. And the room was packed. There was 45 of them in there, all these, all these people. And so I gave my lecture, and then it was question period. And unlike most of my lectures at the university, as soon as I said it's question time, all the little hands went up. There were some people putting up 2 hands. And so it was a sea of little arms and questions, which they weren't asleep like my university students usually are asleep. And the first question that came out was, have you ever been shot at? And I unfortunately had to say no. The next question was something along the same lines. Have you ever been attacked by an alligator? And then the third question came from this little guy in the back who said, have you ever walked into a cave and leaned up against the wall and a secret room opened and you slid down and there was a tomb and there was like a mummy and all of that? It was a very long, drawn out question, and of course I had to answer no because that hadn't happened to me. And I looked over at the teacher, and I could see she was getting embarrassed, and she was like about to chastise the students about, ask serious questions. But I had an epiphany at the time that they were asking questions, given popular culture and things like that, they were asking questions about things that they thought archaeologists did, and I was actually failing miserably. And so my legitimacy as an archaeologist was being sorely tested here. So I had to find something to justify things, and all I could come up with was the fact that one time a colleague of mine and we were going through the jungle, and we got lost in some very dense bush, and I saw a tree, so I thought I'm going to go up on top of that tree and see if I can see a better way through this really difficult jungle. And so I got to the tree and I put my machete on the ground and I grabbed the branch and I put my foot up to pull myself up into the tree, and my left eye got very blurry and I didn't know why, so I shook my head a little bit and I realized it wasn't blurry because I wasn't seeing well, but I put my hand right beside a whole bunch of killer bees that had spread themselves out along the branch of this tree. So yes, we got attacked by these killer bees, and we had to run through the bush that was very difficult to hack through with our machetes. We made a path through there, no problem, running and running and running and running. And I think I got stung 14 times in the face, and my colleague got stung as many times. And we looked like boxers for the next week. We would swell up every night and walk around. And I remember when I told that story to the kids, you can see in the class, they were looking at each other and nodding in approval like I was an archaeologist. You know, I saw one kid in the back say, I told you he was an archaeologist. And so I realized, and I started teaching a class on popular culture and archaeology after that, because it was so much tied into, again, my legitimacy, or, you know, was I an archaeologist or not an archaeologist? It had nothing to do with where I dug or how I dug, but it was whether I had these adventures. And so that was my adventure, was the killer bee adventure, and it got me out of that one. Archaeology, it's really fun to do. I mean, it really is. It's a fun job to have, and believe it or not, you can do archaeology everywhere. I mean, if you're interested in archaeology, you don't have to travel to the Maya world. I mean, there's archaeology going on in your own backyard. So if you want to get started, there's ways of finding someone that's doing archaeology nearby. It might not be the archaeology that you want to do in the future, but it's a way of going out and I mean, I've dug in Belize for 20 years, but I worked in Canada on sites where maybe you didn't find very much, where there weren't big temples. There's something about archaeology being outside, doing manual labor, talking to other people in your unit. There's endless amounts of time to talk on some archaeological sites where you're not finding very much. But there's always this, this curiosity and this potential that you might find something. So even on the most boring sites that you've been at for 3 weeks and not found anything, there's still something inside you that say, the next time I go like this, something might come out of the ground. And I think, you know, if you can get started really early on and at a young age, there's a lot of museums that have outreach courses and things like that. And there's also good opportunities for students in terms of field schools, university level field schools and things like that, that you can get these opportunities. So I would say, you know, I was a hockey player till I was 20 years old and had a 60-word vocabulary. And I've managed to make a living at it, so you can too.